Okay, this next video is going to be all about painting. We have all our UVs laid out here and we're tucking them, nestling them in together, filling up the space at the bottom, leaving space at the top for the head or the face to come, which is quite big. So this should line up with the sense, let's say the logic of scale on your model. So if this part is the largest target visible area on your mesh, it probably should also be the largest shell. So while we started with the shell for the hands very large, filling the whole space, that was for a close-up. And now it's just a part of the whole body, so we shrunk it down to the corner, which again, because we duplicated it in this more rare instance, it's representing both hands. And the next largest visible area is probably the trunk here, and it's represented here. And the arms are quite a lot of surface area. That's the next largest. And the toes just represent more small little petals of shells tucked in areas where it's going to maximize the space. Leaving a space here, I could have filled it with something. It's okay. You could spend an eternity just, quilting all this. Just leaving it as it is okay with this project. Okay. Just a reminder of some terms before we go into painting. In the UV editor, I described this before, the wireframe of the shell, the UV shell. We have any overlapping parts. It's going to shade the semi-transparent to identify overlapped or reversed UVs. It's a multicolor where more overlapping is the warmer, the redder, more violet. So this is two hands at once overlapping. That's why it's that color. And also there is this one, which represents the UV distortion. Areas that are stretched are colored red, or compressed are colored blue. So you could spend a good amount of time just moving UVs to get it more toward the happy Goldilocks zone of the white area, where it's not pressed or stretched. And that means the texture will be compressed or stretched when you put it on there. Not worrying too much about it. Just to, move along. Not going to be perfect your first time, but we're going to just look at other aspects. And this one, which you've seen on before, that bold white line is a texture border. It's showing where the texture borders are. And that's kind of helpful, or it's annoying, because if you're just looking at your mesh and you don't want to see these highlighted borders, they mess with your eyes a bit. But if you really do want to see where a shell is, at the edge of it, you can turn on the texture borders. And there is this other one, which are shell borders, just a shell. And we also learned when we right click, we can go to UV shell, and it's going to highlight the whole shell red right on the interface, the perspective view I happen to be, and that can be convenient too, whatever your style is. All right, so, and there's also a little icon here to take a snapshot. I accidentally turned off the grid, the 0, 1 grid I do want on. So if we want to take a snapshot, you could go up to the image and take a snapshot there, create UV snapshot, or there is an icon right here to do it, which that pops open. So just a few more expounding words on the icons and stuff you're going to accumulate knowledge upon. Okay, we're going to start the painting proper by a new UV shell. So here we go. Again, you could get it once again through here or through the image UV snapshot. All right. So last time we did for the hands the size of X and Y, the pixel count 1200. We're going to need more because that is a good size for the hand, but now we got to draw the whole body with pixels and have enough pixels to spread, to go around. All right, so I'm going to go 2400. I could be higher than this. I could be 3K or 4K, depending on how close that I want to be to that texture. It would make sense to think about how this model is going to be used as a fine art thing, as an animation, as a show-off piece, or just as a sculpture that's going to sit there and not animate, how close do I want to see it? Because now I'm splitting the pixels quite a bit to feed all these shells. So I need more pixel range. So it wouldn't be unheard of to go over 3000 or 4K. So I put 24K. Maybe it's a little low. It's going to get a lot bigger. I'm going to put 28. Now this is a balancing act that I don't want to crash your computer. This can textures, and it's dependent on the graphics card. So this is a sensitive time decision to make, that if this is too high for if you're on a laptop and you're doing this at home and your graphics card is crashing, you could put this down, which you can always change later in Photoshop. This is just generating the snapshot in which you're going to match it to Photoshop or Procreate, however you draw that image. All right, but know that this is going to cause heaviness and slow going sometimes in the texture, in the render, in their interactivity. I would shoot for over 2024. I'm going to choose 2800, split the difference a little. And all right, there, I'm going to do a JPEG. This is just for a snapshot. I'm going to find a location for it. I'll save it as a body snapshot and bring it into Photoshop to paint. Of course, I'm going to click apply first so it saves a snapshot. If it gives you an error here, you will have to select the object so it's bright and green and then apply it, and then it's going to make it. If it's giving you an error, that's because it's picky and Maya wants you to select the entire mesh again, then click the snapshot. Okay, here is the body snapshot with the space reserved for the head yet to come in the last project. And we're going to paint in this area. So we know we already have painting for the hands and bump and spec. We're going to do a master paint, bump, and specular map for this. But we know we've already created a painting for this part, and we can go get it and shrink it down to fit here. So probably that's the first thing we should do. All right, and the first map we're going to make is the color map. So there was my color for the hands for the color map. I'm going to select that whole map and import it in snapshot. It's a little bit large, so I'm going to scale it down. Also, maybe temporarily put the opacity down so I can see what I'm doing. Let's go in a bit closer, see if we can fit that better. And if I hold Shift, I hit Command T. Of course, you probably know that through your Photoshop training and other courses well enough. But if I hold Shift, it's going to ensure to scale it proportionally as I try to get right back to where I was, which is not too hard, just to eyeball, just about there. And you're going to guess, right, that I'll do the same thing with the bump and the specular map. This comes in. All right, it's very easy to recycle UVs and paintings you've already done, and then create a new master puzzle when different part of the body starts to accumulate UV shells. I don't want anything overlapping the new shells, so that part needs to go. This part, oops. I need to erase this so it doesn't overlap it. I'm sure you get what I mean. Let's keep it nice and clean. You can bring up the opacity again if you like. Now, again, it's a color map I'm working on. I'm going to work on that color for everything else. This, I'll use the same kind of chicken scaly skin for the arms and for the legs. So I'll go grab that I used last time on the hands. You might recall that I used this one, which will be fine. Go over back here. All right, this is going to take a little bit to paint. I don't really need to do it in front of you if you have some painting skills already or not really going into painting tutorials or Photoshop tutorials as you might be using something else to paint, and whatever goes faster for you. This just takes a lot of eyeballing and fudging, but we're going to fill all these shells with paint. I'll stop at key areas and be faster progress. And let's pause right there and I'll do a bit. I'm also changing the skin color to blue, which I could choose to do now or later. I think I'm just going to fill everything with this color and then change the overall hue so I know I got everything at once to a unifying color, which will be that bluish tone that I chose. So let's lay this out as yellow first and then change it. Using the stamp tool to paint in areas. I'm just using the select tool to defend certain areas that I don't want to paint on, kind of using it as a mask. You can select area and then maybe select inverse to make sure it doesn't select the area you don't want. You probably have all those tools under your belt already. As I'm building it, I'm just recycling. If I draw one, I can draw that just like this area for a shell. In Photoshop, I can copy it and move it over to use for another one. Just lagging behind because I'm recording and doing this at the same time. So created 2 of them, 3 of them. Should have just made 1, but get the idea. Just need that one. It's really lagging, skipping behind, but that is because of I'm recording simultaneously. It's not because of my system. And you can turn them down, see through them to make sure you're not missing any parts of the mesh that's going to be showing. Make sure you're getting those areas. I mentioned a couple times you could use the warp tool, is very handy once you have these on different layers and it's not making it or stretching it and you want to use the stamp tool. You can do that selected area and in edit you could make the adjustments of stretching it with transform and the warp tool. And I've got a big area with these two, but let's just say I have that one isolated on one layer. This is going to work one layer at a time. Then I can really useful tool to move stuff there to just shimmy it in where it needs to be on a shell. It's a warp tool. Just really make sure you don't have any of these overlaps, these areas where one shell painting cuts into another shell's painting, like that, and I'll erase that area. Just having a real hard time while it's recording, but just with some patience, if you will. I'll show you what I mean. Yeah. And we shouldn't see any of those white lines through it. If we do, you could go in maybe with more precision with the stamp tool or however you like to zone in on specific areas. You're going to get better at painting, UV painting, than you were on the hands. So you probably naturally spend a little more time on this phase to make sure you covered any little errors here, and this would be an error if I clicked over. See how one's lining up to the other? That's the trunk. That would have you don't need any of that yellow going into the next shell. You're going to be a little bit more careful painting in the lines than you were before, and it really doesn't matter if you're a little bit sloppy doing this either. Again, we're not reaching for perfection, but that'll come along as a habit with more experience. So we have the toes to paint. This is the top of the collar and the toes. If clearing the wrong area, I'm going to select inverse because I want to erase along the outside. I've got its own layer. I want to erase so it's nice and cleanly untouching other shell paintings. Now for the toes, we could probably use some of the stuff that we used on the hands. So why not go in and select some of this, which looks nicely ready-made to place on the toes. Recycling whenever or wherever we can. Why not? Just hit Option to move that already paint. We got to be in the right layer, which is that one. Okay, now we're good. And then we can copy that and use it for a toe. It's probably be good to use the warp tool for this one. It's going to take a bit to do all these toes, so I'll probably cut back. Also, I think on my toe, this whole area right here on the shell, I believe that's nail for the toenail. So perhaps that should be more of it colored in black, or I can fade that color. I can do it later if I like. So I'm going to use this as the prototype. I'm going to choose Burn tool and just burn in edges. I shouldn't say the edges, but the face here. That looks like the first 4 layers of faces on the shell. I'm just using midtones. Now I'll go shadows to just slightly fade it in. I don't want a really dark line here. Just like the hands. I kind of want the nails to blend in without the need to sculpt too much and add some unsightly lines. Just have it fade in instead for a good long shot or medium shot, I should say. And I'll use that as a prototype and copy that over to the other toes. It'll be quick. Okay, got those done very quick, just with cut and paste. Just duplicating the layer for the others, and I'll continue placing for the other ones. It's rearranging as we need. Okay, there we are. Okay, that's the color map so far, without, of course, any of the color and hue tweaking that we have to do in blue. But let's just next do these 2 major shells, which represent the jersey and the trunk. And we had in the design that it was this green Boston Celtics jersey. It doesn't say Celtics, but it says 33. That's all I want to put on there, 33 on the front and back. And this is also, I believe, green on the design. Now, normally I could take the texture right from the source image that was in the image plane, like you did with your hand. But in this case, that was just a iconic design. It was made for an image plane primarily, not really for a texture. So I'm going to just go to the source with the flat images and try to do a better job with creating new color mapping for these 2 shells. So there's, as you can see how simple, lyrical that design and painting is. This is just blue. This part is blue. It's going to be like a skin. So actually the only differing part is the jersey, which has a much different texture. This trunk, yeah, it's going to be the same scaly flesh as the rest of the body. So I guess we could do that next, and then the jersey. So that part, we're going to paste in some of this similar texture. Stretch it to fit. Using that warp tool, like I said, to make it flow pretty nicely around the contours of the shell. That works well on a couple levels. One, because it stretches the texture that we need to cover this paint by numbers shell, so to speak, and another, that it's going to flow in a fluid way over the shell, making the directions of the scales flow with its contour, if that makes sense. You may have to do a couple warps to have this work well. You don't want to overstretch it, but you can see how it's curving along the contour. If I can turn down the opacity, you can see how those contours are beginning to nicely match up in, let's call it grain or direction or flow of the warp that's happening. It's pretty useful. And you want to stop before it starts to overstretch, and just leave it there and use the stamp tool for the rest, or maybe other paint tools to fill in the areas without going over the edge. Maybe the stamp tool for the rest. And cleaning up the edges a little bit. That, just using the eraser tool, highlighting areas. Like that, and erasing them. Okay. All right, then all we have left is the jersey, and lastly, to do a overall color balance of making the skin tone bluish. Okay, so for the jersey, let's go for that next, and let's go back to a flat image source, not the one in the design. This certainly is not going to give me enough as I zoom in. It's a very pixelized, just simple put together iconic view for a design. I'm going to go for a higher quality. You're going to have to do the same. When you go for detail, you probably are not going to be able to use textures right off your image plane design. They're not going to be high enough res unless you took, really high res or drew high res images. You're likely going to have to go and find a high res image source to supplant your textures, and that's what we're doing for the jersey. So I have these two images of the jersey. One with the front, and this is the front and the back. It's going to be symmetrical anyway, pretty much. I could have thought, to put a planer, since the back and front are actually symmetrical, I could have put a planer and saved a lot of space and have the front and the back on one doubled up shell, and just, because I'm going to take off Celtics and I'm going to take off Bird here. But that's probably not going to be the case for you. So I wanted to show this because you're certainly likely to have different detail on the front of your character than the back, and that's probably uncommon not to have that. So I'm in a rare situation here. But yes, I do have the front and the back shelled out, unfolded out. I'm just going to take out the Celtics and use it twice. It has distinguishing, that little card, but this is going to be smaller on the page, so you're not going to see it anyway. I'm just covering up the Celtics, not because that's not, let me undo, just made a little mistake, just because it's a little bit too descript. Everybody's probably going to know what it is anyway, and I think I like the soul number 33 on there as a strong enough indicator of who this is as an identity. That'll be more than enough on the nose as a description. So just keeping the design as simple as possible. That is the impetus for taking that out. Not sure I want that little folded over place, so maybe I'll paint over that too. Okay, just something like that. And yeah, I'm going to cover that over because that will look a little bit odd as too much detail. Okay, fine. Actually, the number on the back's a little bit smaller too, I think. Jersey on the front. This is the back, right? Okay. So the number on the back is a little bit bigger. Let's just put this one at a time on there. So I am going to select around this and bring it in the master snapshot with UV stuff. Just let's trace around that crudely, copy it, and bring it back in our master UV body and place it. Turn down the opacity a little bit. Again, hitting Command T to orient that. We have to know where we're going with this, so let's check with Maya real quick. Okay, just looking at Maya, we could probably turn that off. We can see that the front of the jersey and the shell is represented right here. Here's the top of it, and that's the bottom here. So we're just selecting in the UV editor. We can see what lights up here. You can tell that's the front, and this part's the back. Right. And this is the top, and this is the bottom. This is the neck hole, and this is the hole for one arm. And the other arm, I tried to minimize it. I actually made this whole edge, so it's just one way to unfold it that I chose. Yours might be different. Okay, now we know how everything's oriented. Let's place it in Photoshop. So we're fitting this in the front, because this is the front of the jersey. Would normally say Celtics. Here the number's a little bit smaller on the front, so we will differentiate that a bit. Would be good to use the warp tool because it's going to warp nicely around the UV flow here. So let's just double click, leave it at that, and let's go to the warp tool. It's an edit, again, transform, warp, just for that layer. So it's just going to grab only what's on that layer and try to make these warp lines hug the lines for the UV, so we'll get a good overall flow. So the numbers would be coming in here and a little bit flowing like that, right? And there's the armhole. To be stretching like this. Certainly not going to be warping it that far. We're going to have to use the copy or stamp tool or healing brush, whatever you like to use in Photoshop for all those classes you may have painted in. It's really essential that you have some Photoshop skill, as it's going to come in handy the rest of your career. But I'm sure you already know from the prereq classes some Photoshop stuff. If not, it'd be a good idea to try to get up to speed a little bit. And so, warping it pretty nicely on the front. Also, that white line right here is going to happen along that edge right here. You can see faintly through. So it's going to take some time to position this. This is going to be a bit of a tricky paint job. I'm going to grab this piece right here and warp it around and make it that seam of that edge. It might be some trial and error to get that tested on the mesh. Just using that cut and paste and warp all together, patch together. Feels like I'm sewing a quilt again, just within one shell. I'll cut back when I do more. It's the trimming on the back, of course. Going to transform, warp that into better shape. All right, getting closer. Now I'm going to put the back side of the jersey in and blend it all nice. Here's the back side of the jersey. And I'm just going to take out his name, the stamp tool. I think it's kind of nice that I'll have some of these imperfection in the cloth, the wrinkles that will show up in the texture. It will look somewhat realistic and somewhat cartoony at the same time, which is what I was going for. This design, a little bit of a surreal and absurd look with realistic head, but bird arms, realistic hands with bird talons, and it's just a mixture, kind of surrealism of fantasy and reality. Okay, selecting that and putting that in our master plan here for the UV shells. Yep, and using that warp tool again. Just going up into edit, transform, warp, and trying to follow the flow of those lines with my warp is going to be my best shot at getting this to fit the look of the real texture placement. And on the jersey, this hole right here represents one armhole, which on the design of the jersey has a fringe on it, a double line, white, and along the other edge as well. Talking about that line and that line. So it's probably easier to take out of the original source, copy and paste, and it's a little bit tedious, but slap it in there. We know that in Maya, that whole darkened red line, I have the texture borders set on so I could visualize it. But I know that whole bolder red line is where that texture border is to do that sports striping, those two white lines, and then the other one is here. So this one is going to get stretched all along, and this one's smaller. It's no problem. Let's just take a piece of this area and use it along there. It really doesn't like when I record and do this at the same time, but just know this will work smoothly. All right. Of course, going to use the warp tool to get all that into place, and I'll cut back when that's finished. Okay, just smoothing that up a little bit more. kind of like the lumpy, slightly imperfect look of the sports lines here. Uh, it goes along with why I did the shell for the shirt stretched like this instead of a simple planer, which could have been, very flat, easy to paint on in one way look. I just think it'd be fun to have a little bit of a seamless texture here and a flowing, more cartoony, bendy look to the letters, to the numbers anyway. Might suggest when if you have a costume or something on your character like this, or you have some squarish detail that's going to show up, or jersey, whatever, something like this, I might recommend that you do a flat, planar map. It would be a lot easier than what I'm doing here. I just wanted a seamless shell here around. It's not really that worth it if this is the first time you're doing a shell in that way. I think it would be easier just to do a flat view so you could just paint directly on it. It's just that you would have seams along the sides, and that might happen in a jersey anyway that's sewn together. So I was just throwing in a little bit of a curveball with this particular shell on the jersey. You might have something very different that could be flat, and you wouldn't mind seams. So feel free not to follow this and go your own way. Use your own common sense when laying out shells, and this is certainly not authoritative in any way that you have to go in the manner I'm showing you. I just popped that in Maya as a quick test. I just flattened it in Photoshop and saved it as a JPEG. And I know I was going to have to tweak this a little bit, just grabbing the UVs and pushing them around a little bit to better center some of this. It's going to be back and forth until we get some agreement in the areas that we like. And of course, I got to go back and change the skin color. Have a little bit more to do. Just making it follow the flow of the image back and forth with Photoshop. It's easier just to tweak right here in the UVs. No reason to go back and rebrush or paint it. So it's okay with me that I use this curvy style UV shell because I like the organicism and adds in perfection once again to the numbers, and I kind of like the way it looks. So fitting in the more cartooniness of it. This just needs a lot more tweaking, as will your design, I'm sure. The handiness of the UVs, just nudging them here or there. Get the idea. It's this dance between the UV layout and the painting, and finding a nice harmony with the flow of the shapes. It all works together. Everything you're designing in 3D, think of it as an existence of a 2D map folded together like papercraft, and you'll get the idea. So if you absolutely don't like 3D, you realize pretty quick that 2D is a component of it. We're always working with maps and textures that's unfolded on a 2D plane and reassembled only at one point to look 3D. So it all works together with artistry and eyeballing skill. Not that any of this is anything special, just thrown together, but I'm sure you could do a great job. Some of you are really good painters, really good illustrators, really good at drawing, and if you spend a lot more time than I am and do a custom original illustration, just imagine how much better this would look than what I'm doing right now. So it's more of the potential of what you have in you to do this and how much time you're willing to spend. For this assignment, just keep it simple. Just try to get it finished and have a acceptable look to it so you can learn the maximum and move on to the next level. Okay, that's how it's looking so far after a bit of massage of the UVs. And of course, go back into Photoshop, change the color of the skin, get it more that blue hue all over, blend it and match it with the feet and the hands texture, which is a bit more pale, and then do a quick bump and specular map from that. So I'm going to put that into a part 2 of painting. All right, because I have a lot more to work on there, so it's already taking up quite a bit of time just doing this, so I'll save that for another video and end this part here of painting.